When we take this approach, the first verse to look at is 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16. Here the New Testament speaks of the Old Testament, noting that all Scripture is inspired by God. The English phrase is inspired by, Revised Standard Version, or is given by inspiration of, King James Version, translates only one Greek word. This word, as B.B. Warfield pointed out at the beginning of this century, very distinctly does not mean inspired of God. That English phrase has come down to us from the Latin Vulgate, Divinitus Inspirata, through the translation of Wycliffe, all Scripture of God inspired is, and other early English versions. But the Greek word doesn't mean inspired. It literally means God-breathed. This word has never been correctly translated by any English version until publication in 1973 of the New International Version, New Testament. The Greek word theopneustos combines the word for God, theos, and the word for breath or spirit, pneustos. In English, we have the word for God preserved in the words theology, theophany, monotheism, atheist, and in the names Dorothy, Theodore, and others. Pneuma is preserved in the words pneumatic and pneumonia. Together the words teach that the Scriptures are the direct result of the breathing out of God. Warfield writes, "The Greek term has nothing to say of inspiring or of inspiration. It speaks only of a spiring or spiration. What it says of Scripture is, not that it is breathed into by God, or that it is the product of divine inbreathing into its human authors, but that it is breathed out by God. When Paul declares, then, that every Scripture or all Scripture is the product of the divine breath, is God-breathed, he asserts with as much energy as he could employ that Scripture is the product of a specifically divine operation. Some things recorded in the Bible, of course, are merely the words of weak and erring men. But when that's the case, the words are identified as such, and the divine teaching in the passages involved are that such views are indeed weak and erring. To give one extreme example, in the early chapters of the book of Job we read, "Skin for skin, all that a man has he will give for his life." Job chapter 2 verse 4. But that's not true, at least not in all cases. How is this to be explained? When we read the chapter carefully, we see that the words were spoken by the devil, who is elsewhere described as the father of all falsehood. See John chapter 8 verse 44. Similarly, in the rest of the book, we find long chapters filled with the vain and sometimes faulty advice of Job's comforters, but their words are not fully true, and suddenly God breaks into the nonsense to ask, "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge?" Job chapter 38 verse 2. Here, God specifically exposes the false opinions of Job's counselors. The Bible carries absolute authority as to the factualness of the narratives, and whenever God speaks, either directly or through one of his prophets, there's not only perfect accuracy, but absolute authority as well. It's been noted that in the Pentateuch alone, the words, "the Lord said," occur almost 800 times, and that the words, "Thus saith the Lord," are a recurring refrain throughout the prophets. It says, God says. Next to the verse from 2 Timothy may be placed a double series of passages, collected by Warfield, showing clearly that the New Testament writers identified the Bible which they possessed, the Old Testament, with the living voice of God. In one of these classes of passages, writes Warfield, the Scriptures are spoken of as if they were God. In the other, God is spoken of as if he were the Scriptures. In the two together, God and the Scriptures are brought into such conjunction as to show that in point of directness of authority, no distinction was made between them. The sensitive reader of the Bible can only conclude that the unique and divine character of the sacred books was by no means an invented or abstract affirmation of the biblical writers, but rather a basic assumption behind all that they taught or wrote. Examples of the first class of passages are such as these. Galatians chapter 3 verse 8. The Scripture forsake